What happens when the man who once fired his secretary discovers, 5 years later, that she's the billionaire CEO about to take his empire? This is not just a story of corporate rivalry. It is the story of Claire Montgomery, a woman cast aside while carrying a secret no one knew, 3 unborn sons who would one day change everything. How does a young mother, abandoned and humiliated, climb from counting pennies in a rundown apartment to standing on the cover of Fortune magazine? How does a woman once told she would never belong become the architect of a takeover that leaves the powerful trembling? And when the past finally catches up, when her children innocently call the man who betrayed her dad in front of an entire boardroom, what choice will he make? What choice will she make? This is a story about resilience, about the price of betrayal, and about the kind of strength that can only be forged in fire. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now let's begin. The rain had been falling since morning, the kind of steady drizzle that clung to coats and made the sidewalks glisten under the gray skies of Chicago, mirrored Claire Montgomery's mood as she walked out of the lobby of Reed Enterprises, clutching a cardboard box filled with the remnants of her professional life family photos, a half-used notebook, a mug she had bought from a thrift store. The box felt heavier than it should have, as though every broken dream had been packed inside. She could still feel the sting of Jonathan Reed's words, delivered only an hour earlier in that vast boardroom on the 35th floor. This is a business decision. Claire, don't make it personal. As if being fired while quietly carrying his child wasn't personal. Claire had worked for Jonathan for nearly 4 years. She had been more than just a secretary. She had been the quiet force who kept his schedule running, who drafted his correspondence, who often stayed late to polish presentations he barely skimmed before delivering. She had admired him once, even trusted him, and then, one night blurred by vulnerability and misplaced affection, she had allowed herself to believe he saw her as more than just an employee. That night had changed everything. Now, standing alone with her box, she felt the full weight of his rejection. The other employees avoided her eyes as they walked past, whispering in hushed tones. She could almost hear their thoughts. She must have done something wrong. She should have known better. The humiliation burned worse than the cold rain waiting outside. Claire stepped through the revolving doors, the damp air rushing against her cheeks. The street smelled of wet pavement and exhaust fumes. She tightened her coat around her, though the fabric was thin and offered little protection. Above her, high in his glass office, Jonathan Reed watched from behind tinted windows. She didn't need to see him to know it. She could feel his gaze, detached and untroubled, as if she were nothing more than a line item removed from his payroll. Her shoes splashed through shallow puddles as she walked toward the bus stop. Each step echoed with disbelief. She wasn't just leaving a job, she was leaving stability, health care, the modest paycheck that had kept her afloat. And now, pregnant and alone, she had no idea how she would manage tomorrow, let alone the months ahead. On the crowded bus ride home, she kept her eyes fixed on the raindrops streaking the window. The cardboard box sat awkwardly on her lap. The city blurred past coffee shops with warm lights, people carrying umbrellas, a child tugging at his mother's hand. She pressed her palm against her stomach, a barely perceptible swell beneath her blouse, a whisper of life, a secret that would soon grow undeniable. Jonathan had offered her money when she had told him an unmarked check slid across the desk, his jaw tight, his voice clinical. "Take care of it. Claire, you'll land on your feet." She had pushed the check back toward him. That was the last time she had seen warmth in his eyes turn to stone. At her small apartment on the edge of Tacoma, she set the box down on the kitchen table. The apartment smelled faintly of damp carpet and yesterday's coffee grounds. She sat in the single chair, staring at the collection of items that now seemed like artifacts from another life. Her mind raced rent due in 2 weeks, savings almost gone, medical bills looming. She wanted to cry, to collapse into grief, but she couldn't afford the luxury of despair. Not anymore. Instead, She pulled the photo of her parents from the box, a faded image of them standing in front of a modest farmhouse in eastern Washington. They had always told her she was strong, even when she didn't believe it. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Claire, storms pass. You just have to keep walking." But this storm felt endless. That night, sleep wouldn't come. She lay on her worn-out mattress, listening to the rain against the window, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. She whispered into the darkness, half to herself, half to the tiny heartbeat inside her. "I don't know how we're going to make it, but I promise you, I'll try." Her voice trembled, yet there was a flicker of resolve beneath it. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the humiliation and fear, something stronger was stirring. She didn't recognize it yet, but it was the beginning of a fire that would carry her through the years ahead. For now, though, she was just a woman left behind, drenched in rain and loss, staring into a future that felt impossibly uncertain. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and fear. Claire Montgomery's apartment, a one-bedroom walk-up on the outskirts of Tacoma, had never felt so suffocating. The beige walls were stained from years of moisture, and the radiator rattled at night like an old man coughing in his sleep. The space smelled faintly of mildew no matter how often she scrubbed. She sat at her small kitchen table, its surface chipped and unsteady, with a handful of coins spread out before her. Quarters, dimes, nickels. Her entire week's budget stared back at her in dull silver. Rent was due in less than 2 weeks, and she barely had enough to cover groceries, let alone the growing medical costs. Her doctor had recommended prenatal vitamins, a balanced diet, and plenty of rest. She almost laughed at the absurdity. Vitamins cost nearly $15 a bottle. Fresh produce spoiled too quickly. And rest belonged to women with security, not to a single woman who had just lost her job and carried 3 lives she hadn't planned for. That afternoon, she walked to the grocery store 2 blocks away, clutching 7 crumpled dollars in her coat pocket. She stood in the aisle staring at the choices, her throat tightening. A carton of eggs and a loaf of bread would stretch across the week. But the vitamins, those were for the babies. She lingered there for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the labels as other shoppers moved past her without noticing. Finally, she chose the bread and eggs. As she handed the cashier her last few coins, shame settled over her like a second coat. She walked home slowly, carrying the small bag as though it weighed 100 pounds. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, chewing a slice of plain bread, and wondered if she was being selfish. Could she really bring a child into this world when she had nothing to give? Her mind replayed Jonathan's voice, calm and cold. "Take care of it, Claire. You'll land on your feet." She pressed her hand to her stomach. The swell was still barely there, but she could feel the change inside her body, the quiet hum of life that defied her despair. "Should I?" she whispered into the dark. "Would it be kinder if I didn't?" The thought terrified her. Sleep came fitfully. She dreamed of tiny hands reaching for her, of faceless children calling out in voices she couldn't quite hear. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the heavy certainty that the choice had already been made. She could never undo this. Not now. Not ever. The following morning, Claire found herself standing in front of the community clinic. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and tired hope. Women sat with children tugging at their sleeves. Men filled out forms with weary expressions. When her name was called, she followed the nurse into a small room. The walls were bare except for a faded poster of a smiling family. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked gentle questions. Was she eating well? Did she have support? Claire shook her head, embarrassed, unable to explain the whole truth. She left the clinic with a small bottle of sample vitamins and a stack of pamphlets about nutrition. That evening, she boiled 2 eggs for dinner and swallowed the first vitamin tablet with a sip of tap water. It wasn't enough, she knew, but it was something. As the days dragged on, Claire searched for work, sending out resumes to offices across the city. Each rejection stung, but she refused to give up. The rent notice taped to her door was a constant reminder that time was slipping away. Her apartment became both a refuge and a prison. The narrow hallway, the peeling linoleum floor, the single window that overlooked an alley, it all pressed down on her. Yet, within those walls, she began talking to her unborn child, a fragile thread of connection that steadied her through the long nights. "I don't know if I'll be good at this," she admitted softly one evening, as rain tapped against the glass. "But I know I'll try. I promise I'll fight for you, even if no one else does." Her voice cracked, but she meant every word. One night, when the power went out across the block, she sat in candlelight and wrote in her journal. Her handwriting wavered as she scrawled the words, "I will not give up. Even if it kills me, I will not give up." It wasn't courage in the grand sense. It was survival. It was love, stubborn and fierce, taking root in the middle of despair. Claire didn't know how, but she knew she would carry this child. Perhaps it was reckless. Perhaps it was doomed to fail. But the decision was no longer about Jonathan, or even about her. It was about the small flicker of life growing inside her, demanding to be seen. And so, as another cold Seattle night wrapped itself around her, Claire Montgomery chose to keep going, to endure, to protect. She didn't yet understand that this choice made in the quiet of a crumbling apartment, with nothing but determination to guide her, would become the very foundation of the empire she was destined to build. The delivery came too early. Claire had prayed for time, for just a few more weeks to grow stronger, to gather resources, to prepare herself for motherhood. But life rarely bowed to her hopes. At barely 7 months, sharp cramps sent her rushing to the public hospital in Tacoma, a place with peeling paint and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead like angry bees. The nurses worked quickly, their faces calm but urgent. "Triplets," one whispered, her voice edged with concern. "All 3 are small, prepare the incubators." Claire's world blurred with pain, fear, and the sterile smell of antiseptic. Hours later, she heard the fragile cries of her sons, each one softer than a kitten's mule. 3 tiny lives, wrapped in blankets, rushed away to the neonatal intensive care unit. She caught only the briefest glimpse, fists no larger than her thumb, skin translucent with veins visible beneath. Her heart broke and healed in the same moment. When she was finally wheeled into the NICU, Claire stood beside the incubators, trembling. Each baby lay under the glow of warm lights, tubes snaking into impossibly small arms. Machines hummed and beeped, keeping rhythm with their tenuous hold on life. She pressed her hand against the glass, tears blurring her vision. "They're fighters," a nurse said gently, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You'd be amazed what these little ones can survive." Claire whispered their names through cracked lips. Ethan, Daniel, Samuel. She had chosen them weeks earlier, scribbled on a notepad in moments of hope. Now, seeing them so fragile, the names felt like prayers. The days turned into weeks. Claire lived in the hospital, sleeping in a stiff chair by their side, eating crackers from vending machines, her body still aching from the delivery. She learned the language of monitors, flinching at every alarm, rejoicing in every ounce gained. She held her sons when allowed, skin to skin, humming lullabies she barely remembered from her own childhood. It was a strange rhythm of exhaustion and devotion. When the bills began to arrive, long pages filled with numbers she could barely comprehend, Claire felt the weight of despair pressing again. Insurance had ended with her job. Every test, every hour in the NICU, every medication carried a cost. She stuffed the papers into a drawer, unable to look at them for long, but she could not walk away. When Ethan's tiny hand curled around her finger, when Daniel opened his mouth in a soundless cry, when Samuel blinked up at her with solemn eyes far too old for his hours of life, those moments bound her. They gave her strength she didn't know she had. After 6 weeks, the boys were stable enough to come home. The hospital provided second-hand car seats, the straps frayed but functional. Claire bundled them carefully into the taxi, whispering encouragement as if they could understand. Her apartment, drafty and dim, now held 3 bassinets borrowed from a local church charity. The nights became endless, feedings every 2 hours, diapers stacked high, laundry never finished. Claire moved through the apartment like a ghost, her body sore, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness. Some mornings, she didn't remember the last time she had eaten. Still, she forced herself up at every whimper, every cry. She worked odd jobs when she could, answering phones for a small real estate office during the day, cleaning offices at night when Ellen, her only friend, could watch the babies. Money slipped through her fingers faster than she could earn it. Her journal, once filled with neat handwriting, now carried jagged scrawls, tired, hungry, behind on rent. But the boys are smiling today. Neighbors whispered, some pitied her, others judged. 3 babies, no husband. What was she thinking? Their words stung, but she had no time for shame. Every hour was devoted to survival. Yet, even in the chaos, there were moments of light. The first time Ethan smiled, a crooked, gummy grin, she wept into his blanket. Daniel, with his boundless energy, kicked so hard he nearly rolled over. Samuel, the quietest, stared at her with a steady gaze that made her feel both vulnerable and seen. They were small victories, but they sustained her. One evening, as she sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, bottles lined up beside her, Claire realized something profound. She wasn't just enduring for herself anymore. Every sleepless night, every unpaid bill, every ounce of energy poured into these boys. It was a declaration, a refusal to let despair win. Her life had been broken apart, but in its place, something new was being built. Still, the struggle was relentless. Notices piled at her door, overdue rent, unpaid hospital bills, threats of eviction. She stretched groceries until the pantry held nothing but rice and powdered milk. There were nights when her stomach growled while she rocked her sons to sleep, singing softly to drown out her own hunger. But whenever doubt whispered, she only had to look at them 3 pairs of tiny hands, 3 sets of eyes slowly opening to the world. "You are my reason," she told them one night, holding them close despite her trembling arms. "I'll give you the world, even if it breaks me." Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a vow. In those moments, Claire Montgomery transformed. She was no longer just a woman discarded by a powerful man. She was a mother, fierce, unyielding, and unbreakable. And though she could not yet see the road ahead, though her days were filled with hardship and her nights with exhaustion, a fire had been lit, a fire that would one day turn struggle into triumph. The months blurred into a cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and exhaustion. Claire lived on coffee and sheer willpower, her body constantly on the edge of collapse. Yet, in the rare quiet moments when all 3 boys slept at once, their tiny chests rising and falling in rhythm, she felt a flicker of something beyond survival. One night, sitting at the wobbly kitchen table with her sons finally asleep, Claire pulled out an old spiral notebook. The pages were dog-eared, filled with sketches and diagrams she had scribbled years earlier during her time at Reed Enterprises. It was the idea she had once dared to propose in a staff meeting, a logistics software that could predict demand patterns and optimize routes for delivery fleets. Jonathan had dismissed her with a laugh. "You're here to take calls, Claire. Leave the innovation to the engineers." She had buried the humiliation, pushing the dream aside, but now, staring at those faded pencil marks, she felt something stir. Maybe this was foolish, maybe it was impossible, but it was hers. That night, she opened her old laptop, the keys sticky from years of use. Balancing Samuel in one arm, she typed with her free hand. Her fingers stumbled across the keyboard, rusty from disuse, but the rhythm slowly returned. She searched tutorials, downloaded free coding tools, and forced herself to relearn what she had once loved. Hours slipped by. The apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional whimper from the bassinets. Claire's eyes ached, her back screamed for rest, but she kept typing. Each night became the same exhaustion battled against determination. She fed Ethan, burped Daniel, rocked Samuel back to sleep, and then returned to the glow of the screen. Her code was messy, her algorithms crude, but every line felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Still, doubt gnawed at her. What if she failed again? What if the idea was worthless? She couldn't afford to chase dreams when rent notices threatened eviction. Yet the thought of surrendering, of living only to scrape by, felt like another kind of death. It was during this fragile balancing act that Ellen Parker reappeared in her life. Ellen had been a college friend, someone who had always believed in Claire's potential. They hadn't spoken in years, but one afternoon, as Claire pushed a second-hand stroller with all three boys tucked inside, she heard a familiar voice. Claire Montgomery. She turned to see Ellen, stylish as ever, holding a bag of groceries. Her eyes widened at the sight of the triplets. "Oh my God, you've been busy." Claire managed a tired smile. That's one way to put it. Over coffee at a nearby diner. Ellen listened as Claire recounted the whirlwind of the last year, the firing, the pregnancy, the premature births, the struggle to survive. Ellen didn't interrupt, didn't pity. She simply listened, nodding, her expression equal parts sorrow and admiration. When Claire finally mentioned the software idea, her voice dropped to a whisper, as though speaking it aloud would make it vanish. "It's probably nothing, just something I tinker with when the boys are asleep." Ellen leaned forward. "Don't you dare call it nothing. Claire, I remember how sharp you were in college. If you believe in this, then it matters." Claire shook her head. "I don't have the money, or the time, or you have me." Ellen interrupted gently. "I can't do much, but I can help. I'll loan you a little to get started. No strings." Tears burned Claire's eyes. Pride urged her to refuse, but desperation pushed her to accept. "I don't know if I can pay you back." Ellen smiled softly. "You will. I know you." That evening, Claire held the envelope Ellen had slipped into her hand, 2 crisp $100 bills. To anyone else, it might seem small. To Claire, it was the world. Enough to upgrade her laptop, to buy a coding textbook, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't chasing a ghost. As the boys slept that night, she opened the new book, the scent of fresh ink rising as she traced the diagrams with her finger. She whispered to herself, "You can do this, one line at a time." But even as hope glimmered, fear clung stubbornly. What if Ellen had placed her faith in the wrong person? What if Claire wasted both her time and her friend's money? She looked over at the bassinets. Ethan stirred. Daniel kicked in his sleep. Samuel sighed softly. Her fear softened. No, this wasn't about failure anymore. This was about trying, about proving to her sons that life could be more than endurance. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, exhausted yet strangely alive. Her life was still chaos, but amid the cluttered table, the flickering laptop, and the steady breathing of 3 fragile boys, she felt the smallest seed of something she hadn't dared believe in for months. Hope. And though she couldn't see it yet, that seed would one day grow into the foundation of an empire. The first year of building Aurora Systems was a blur of exhaustion, layered on exhaustion. By day, Claire juggled part-time jobs that barely kept food on the table. By night, after feeding the boys and rocking them to sleep, she returned to her laptop, typing until her vision blurred. When her prototype was finally ready, a crude but promising version of her predictive logistics software, she began knocking on doors. Literally. Her first pitch took place in the corner of a noisy coffee shop. The investor, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, scrolled through his phone while she presented slides on her battered laptop. "Optimizing delivery routes," he said. "Raising an eyebrow? That's cute. But Amazon will crush you before you even start." Claire tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm not competing with giants. I'm offering solutions for mid-sized companies, businesses that can't afford custom software but desperately need efficiency." He smirked, snapped his briefcase shut, and left without shaking her hand. That was only the beginning. Over the next year, she pitched in diners, rented community centers, even in the back of a church basement. Sometimes she brought the boys in a stroller, apologizing as she bounced them on her knee while trying to explain her idea. Most investors dismissed her before she finished her first sentence. One man leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You're a secretary with 3 kids and no husband. Why would anyone give you a dime?" The cruelty cut deep, but she smiled tightly, gathered her papers, and walked out with her head high. For every rejection, she told herself, she was one step closer to the person who would finally say yes. At home, the boys became her world and her anchor. They were growing now, toddling across the apartment floor, each with a personality as distinct as fingerprints. Ethan was bold, always the first to try climbing onto the couch or to toddle toward a stranger with outstretched hands. His laughter filled the room, bright and fearless. Daniel, in contrast, was meticulous. He stacked blocks into neat towers, lined up toy cars in perfect rows, and frowned when things were out of order. He could sit for long stretches, focused with an intensity that made him seem older than his years. Samuel was different, still quiet, observant. While his brothers fought over toys, he sat back, watching, absorbing everything with solemn eyes. He spoke less, but when he did, his words carried surprising weight. At night, when they were finally asleep, Claire sometimes sat beside their cribs, tracing the outlines of their faces with her eyes. "You're why I can't quit," she whispered. "You're the reason I'll keep going, no matter how many times they slam the door." The rejections piled up, but so did her determination. She revised her pitch, polished her code, and studied business books borrowed from the library. Ellen remained her cheerleader, calling often, sometimes slipping a few dollars into Claire's hand with a wink. "Think of it as seed money," Ellen said once. Every empire starts with a seed. Still, the hardship was relentless. Rent hovered like a storm cloud. Medical bills continued to arrive, reminders of the boys' early fight for life. Claire took on cleaning jobs at night, scrubbing office floors until her back ached, only to return home and log more hours at her computer. There were moments when despair nearly swallowed her, like the time a potential investor laughed outright, saying, "Sweetheart, if this were a good idea, someone smarter than you would have done it already." She walked home in the rain that night, her shoes soaked, her spirit heavy. But when she opened the door, Ethan barreled toward her with sticky hands. Daniel proudly showed her a block tower, and Samuel simply lifted his arms, wordlessly asking to be held. In their eyes, she wasn't a failure, she was their mother, their entire world. That night, she typed with renewed fury, each keystroke a promise one day. They would never again go hungry or cold. Over time, Claire began to notice small victories. A local trucking company agreed to test her software. The results weren't perfect, but fuel savings were measurable. Word spread slowly, quietly, like embers catching. The road was still harsh, too harsh, sometimes, but she had traveled so far already. There was no turning back, and though she didn't realize it yet, the relentless grind, the nights of rejection, the mornings of exhaustion, these were not just trials. They were the crucible that was shaping her into the woman she was destined to become. It happened on a Tuesday, a gray morning when Claire had nearly convinced herself to give up. She had been turned away so many times that the word no echoed in her head even before she spoke a word. But Ellen had urged her to try one more meeting, this time with a small community investment fund in Tacoma that specialized in supporting local entrepreneurs. The office wasn't glamorous. A modest building above a bakery, with the faint smell of cinnamon rolls wafting through the air. Claire carried her worn laptop bag and a folder of printouts, her palms damp with nerves. She wore her one good blazer, pressed carefully the night before. Inside, 2 representatives greeted her, both women, middle-aged, with practical smiles. They invited her to sit at a round table rather than a boardroom desk. Already, it felt different. Claire took a breath and began. She spoke not only of her software, but of her vision how Aurora Systems could give small and mid-sized businesses the tools they needed to survive in a market dominated by giants. She showed them the test results from the trucking company, modest but promising. For once, no one interrupted her, no one laughed. They leaned in, asked questions, and actually listened. When she finished, there was a pause. One of the women glanced at the other, then smiled. "Claire, we believe in second chances," she said, "and we believe in your idea. It's not polished yet, but it's real. We'd like to offer you seed funding." The words hung in the air, almost unreal. Claire's throat tightened. "You mean you'll invest?" "Yes," the second woman said warmly. "It won't be millions, but it's enough to give you room to grow." Claire held her composure until she left the building. Then, standing on the sidewalk with the smell of cinnamon still lingering, she pressed her hands to her face and wept tears of relief, of release, of hope. With the funding, everything shifted. A month later, she opened Aurora Systems' first office, a tiny suite above a laundromat in downtown Tacoma. The rent was cheap, the carpet worn, and the ceiling tiles yellowed with age. But to Claire, it was a palace. She furnished it with second-hand desks and mismatched chairs Ellen helped her find at thrift stores. She bought a whiteboard for brainstorming and taped her son's crayon drawings to the wall as decorations. The boys were delighted, toddling across the empty space, their voices echoing. "Is this your work?" Mama Ethan asked, wide-eyed. Claire crouched down, pulling them close. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with pride. "This is where it all begins." She worked tirelessly, hiring her first 2 employees, young programmers just out of community college who believed in her vision enough to work for modest salaries. Together, they refined the software, fixing glitches, improving algorithms, running endless simulations. Clients were hesitant at first, but Claire's persistence paid off. A local distributor signed on, followed by a small regional grocery chain. Slowly, data began to flow, and results spoke louder than her words ever had. Routes shortened, costs dropped, and clients noticed. Each time a new contract was signed, Claire felt a surge of exhilaration. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was building. At home. Life was still demanding. The boys were preschool age now, full of boundless energy. Ethan loved climbing onto anything he could find, giving Claire daily heart attacks. Daniel insisted on organizing his toy cars by color and size, sometimes scolding his brothers if they disrupted the order. Samuel remained the quiet observer, often sitting with Claire while she worked, asking thoughtful questions that surprised her with their depth. Some nights, after putting them to bed, she would return to her laptop, reviewing contracts while Samuel padded out of his room, rubbing his eyes. "Why do you work so much?" "Mama," he asked softly one evening. She gathered him into her lap. "Because I want to build something for you and your brothers, something that will last." He studied her face with those solemn eyes and nodded, as though he understood more than a 4-year-old should. The first breakthrough didn't solve everything. Money was still tight, bills still loomed. But for the first time, Claire felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She wasn't begging at closed doors anymore. She was walking through one that had finally opened. One evening, Ellen stopped by the office with a bottle of sparkling cider. They poured it into paper cups and raised a toast. "To Aurora Systems," Ellen said. "May it rise higher than anyone expects." Claire smiled, her heart swelling. "To hope," she whispered. And as she looked around the small, imperfect office, the mismatched furniture, the scribbles on the whiteboard, the drawings taped to the walls, she knew this was more than just the beginning of a business. It was the beginning of a life reclaimed. 5 years passed in a blur of deadlines, late nights, and relentless determination. What had once been a dream scribbled in a notebook had grown into a force few in the logistics industry could ignore. Aurora Systems was no longer a scrappy startup above a laundromat. It was now a fast-rising company with sleek offices in downtown Seattle, a growing staff of engineers and analysts, and contracts with regional and national distributors. The growth had not been smooth. There were moments when payroll teetered on the edge, when servers crashed at the worst possible times, when competitors threatened lawsuits to intimidate her. But Claire weathered it all, balancing crisis management with bedtime stories, investor meetings with parent-teacher conferences. It was the fire of necessity that forged her into a leader. She couldn't afford the luxury of doubt. Her mornings began before dawn, reviewing reports while sipping coffee at the kitchen counter as the boys stirred awake. Afternoons were a dance between conference calls and soccer practice. Nights belonged to strategy sessions, punctuated by kisses on sleepy foreheads. Claire lived in constant motion, but in that rhythm, she found strength. By the company's 5th anniversary, Aurora Systems had become a billion-dollar enterprise. Industry analysts marveled at how a relatively unknown firm managed to outpace competitors. Investors speculated about the mysterious CEO who rarely granted interviews, choosing instead to let the company's results speak for themselves. Claire's refusal to step into the spotlight only deepened the intrigue. Articles appeared in Forbes, Business Insider, and regional newspapers, all asking the same question: who was the woman behind Aurora Systems inside the company? Her employees adored her. They knew her as a fair but demanding leader, someone who pushed for excellence while remembering birthdays and sending handwritten notes of thanks. She insisted on creating a culture where parents could balance family and work an ethos born of her own struggles. Yet, outside those walls, she was a mystery to the world. She was simply the CEO who built a billion-dollar company out of nowhere. At home, her sons were no longer toddlers, but bright, energetic boys, each carving his own path. Ethan, now 6, had inherited her boldness. He loved sports, especially soccer, and approached every game with fierce determination. His coaches admired his leadership on the field, his ability to rally teammates after a loss. Claire often watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride as he sprinted across the field, fearless and tireless. Daniel had grown into an organizer, just as meticulous as he'd been with toy cars years before. He excelled in school, particularly in math and science, often staying up late building elaborate models from kits or experimenting with circuits. Teachers praised his discipline and precision, though they sometimes worried he was too hard on himself. Samuel remained the quiet observer, but his silence masked a deep well of creativity. He had taken to drawing, filling sketchbooks with intricate landscapes and portraits that seemed far beyond his age. One evening, Claire found a drawing of her sitting at her laptop, the glow of the screen reflected in her eyes. When she asked why he had chosen that subject, he simply said, "Because that's when you look the strongest." Their personalities filled the home with a balance of energy, order, and reflection. They bickered as brothers do, but their bond was unshakable. Each, in his own way, mirrored a part of Claire and a part of the man who had abandoned them. Despite her success, Claire never forgot the nights of hunger, the rejections, the humiliation of being dismissed. She carried those memories like stones in her pocket, a reminder never to become the kind of leader who discarded people when they were most vulnerable. Ellen remained by her side, transitioning from friend to informal advisor. "You've built an empire, Claire," she said one evening as they shared a glass of wine in the office overlooking Puget Sound. "But you've also built something rarer, a company people actually love working for." Claire smiled, though her eyes were tired. "Sometimes I still feel like that girl counting coins on her kitchen table." Ellen reached over, squeezing her hand. "That girl built this. Don't ever forget that." The media's obsession with her identity grew, but Claire resisted the pull. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Revealing herself meant opening the door to the past she had fought so hard to leave behind, and somewhere in that past was Jonathan Reed, still a prominent name in business. Though rumors suggested his company was struggling under his leadership, she told herself she didn't care. Her focus was on the future, on her sons, on Aurora, on the legacy she was building. Still, some nights, when the house was quiet, she caught herself wondering what he would think if he knew. Would he regret dismissing her? Would he recognize his own reflection in the 3 boys with bright blue eyes? One Saturday morning, as she cooked pancakes in the kitchen, Ethan bounded in, followed closely by Daniel and Samuel. "Mom, when are you going to let people know it's you?" Ethan asked, dripping syrup onto the counter. Claire raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "You know," Daniel said, pushing up his glasses. "All those articles about the mystery CEO? Everyone wants to know who you are." Samuel, always quiet, added softly, "You don't like to be seen." Claire set the spatula down, looking at them one by one. "I'll step into the spotlight when it's the right time. For now, it's enough that you know, and that I'm here for you." Ethan frowned but didn't argue. Daniel shrugged, satisfied with her answer. Samuel only nodded, returning to his sketchbook. For Claire, the conversation was a reminder of the delicate balance she lived in between anonymity and recognition, between the past and the future. The years had been fire burning away weakness, forging resilience, and illuminating the path ahead. Claire was no longer just a survivor. She was a leader, a mother, a force. And though the world clamored to see the face behind Aurora Systems, she remained in the shadows for now, because she knew the day would come when she could no longer hide. And when that day arrived, the world would not only see her success, it would see the fire that had carried her here. The email arrived on an ordinary Wednesday morning. Claire was reviewing quarterly reports at the office when her assistant forwarded the invitation. The Global Technology Summit, Chicago, Illinois. Her eyes lingered on the word Chicago. It had been nearly a decade since she had set foot in that city. The memories lived in her like old scars, sharp, aching reminders of humiliation, of rejection, of walking out of Reed Enterprises with a cardboard box in her arms and rain soaking her coat. Chicago wasn't just a place, it was the crucible of her pain. Now it was calling her back. Aurora Systems had been asked to present as one of the keynote companies. Not just a panel appearance, not just a booth on the exhibition floor, but a spotlight address before thousands of industry leaders, investors, and media outlets. It was the kind of opportunity every CEO dreamed of. Claire closed the email and sat in silence, her heart pounding. She knew what it meant. Jonathan Reed would be there. Reed Enterprises was headquartered in Chicago, and Jonathan was still its public face, though whispers suggested his empire was slipping. For years, she had avoided the thought of crossing paths with him. She had stayed in her lane, built her company, and focused on her children. But some part of her had always known that this day would come, that sooner or later. The past would rise to meet her. That evening, after dinner. She sat at the kitchen table while the boys worked on homework. Ethan sprawled across his chair, chewing the end of a pencil while scrawling math problems. Daniel sat upright, his papers neatly organized, every answer precise. Samuel sketched in the margins of his workbook, a landscape of Chicago's skyline from a photograph he had seen. "Mom," Ethan asked suddenly, "are we really going to Chicago? I heard you talking on the phone about it." Claire hesitated. She had wanted to prepare them slowly, but children had a way of noticing things adults tried to hide. "Yes," she said carefully. "There's an important conference there. I'll be giving a speech." Daniel's eyes lit up, like the articles, the big ones about Aurora. "Yes," she said again, smiling faintly. "This will be even bigger." Samuel looked up from his sketch, his eyes steady. "That's where he lives, isn't it?" The room went quiet. Claire's breath caught. Who, she asked softly, though she already knew. "Our Father," Samuel said. His voice was calm, but his words hung heavy in the air. Ethan and Daniel both turned to her, waiting. Claire folded her hands on the table, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, Chicago is where your father lives. It's also where I used to work, a long time ago." "Will we see him?" Ethan asked. His tone was curious, not fearful. "Maybe," Claire admitted. "I don't know yet. But this trip, it's important for us, for Aurora, for our family." The boys nodded slowly, processing her answer in their own ways. Daniel returned to his homework. Ethan leaned back in thought, and Samuel lowered his gaze, shading the lines of his sketch with careful strokes. That night, after they were asleep, Claire stood at the window of her bedroom, staring out at the Seattle skyline. The lights shimmered against the dark waters of Puget Sound, steady and calm. She wrapped her arms around herself, her thoughts restless. She remembered the girl she had been in Chicago, the secretary with trembling hands, dismissed as though she were disposable. The memory of Jonathan's cold eyes still burned in her chest. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She was Claire Montgomery, founder and CEO of a billion-dollar company. She was the mother of 3 remarkable boys. She had survived storms he couldn't even imagine. And yet, she was afraid. Afraid of what it would feel like to see him again. Afraid of the emotions that might rise: anger, hurt, maybe even a trace of the love she had once felt. But beneath the fear was something else, something stronger: pride. She had walked through fire, and she had come out not just alive, but transformed. Returning to Chicago wasn't just about business. It was about facing the place where she had been broken, standing tall where she had once been, made small. Claire whispered into the dark, as though speaking to the younger version of herself. You'll walk into that city on your own terms this time. Preparations for the trip consumed the weeks that followed. Security arrangements were made, flights booked, schedules confirmed. Ellen would accompany her, as she always did, offering both practical support and emotional ballast. When the day came, Claire and her sons boarded a private jet chartered through the company. It wasn't luxury for its own sake, it was necessity. Privacy meant fewer questions, fewer risks. Ethan pressed his face against the window as the plane taxied. We're really flying private? This is insane. Daniel carefully unfolded the conference program, already circling events he wanted to attend. Samuel sat quietly, sketching the airplane cabin with his usual precision. As the plane lifted into the sky, Claire fastened her seatbelt and allowed herself a deep breath. Seattle shrank below them, and ahead lay Chicago, the city of her fall, and perhaps the stage of her greatest triumph. The Chicago Technology Summit was held in a gleaming glass tower on the riverfront, a symbol of the city's ambition to be seen as the heart of innovation. The lobby buzzed with movement investors in sharp suits, journalists juggling cameras, young entrepreneurs clutching badges like talismans. Claire entered flanked by Ellen and her security team. Her sons had been whisked away with their nanny to a museum outing, their laughter echoing faintly in her memory as she stepped into the marble hall. Without them at her side, she felt strangely lighter, though the weight of what lay ahead pressed hard on her chest. Reporters turned as she passed, whispering, snapping photos. For years she had avoided this kind of spotlight, but here she was, walking directly into it. Her navy dress was perfectly tailored, her hair pinned back in a style that conveyed both elegance and restraint. She reminded herself with every step, you belong here. You built this. Her keynote was scheduled for the following morning. Tonight was the opening reception, a mingling of executives, sponsors, and media. Claire had planned her strategy carefully: establish her presence, shake hands, and avoid unnecessary attention. But fate rarely followed plans. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne flutes. The hum of conversation filled the air. Claire circulated, speaking briefly with representatives from partner companies, exchanging cards, answering questions with calm precision. And then she felt it, that unmistakable sensation of eyes fixed on her, the air shifting like a storm about to break. She turned her head, and there he was, Jonathan Reed. He looked older than she remembered, though not yet diminished. His hair, once effortlessly styled, was flecked with gray at the temples. His tailored suit spoke of wealth, but his eyes betrayed something else: strain, perhaps, or a weariness hidden behind a practiced smile. Their gazes locked across the room, and for a heartbeat, time folded in on itself. She was back in that office, holding a box of belongings while he looked away from her as though she were nothing. But then the memory dissolved, replaced by the present by the knowledge that she was not the same woman anymore. Jonathan excused himself from a cluster of executives and began to cross the room toward her. Claire's pulse quickened, but her posture remained unshaken. Claire Montgomery. His voice was lower than she remembered, tinged with disbelief. I can't say I expected to see you here. She turned slightly, offering the faintest of smiles. Mr. Reed. Her tone was even polite, but cool. Chicago is still your city, I see. His lips twitched, attempting confidence. It has its challenges. But yes, and you Aurora Systems, you've made quite a name for yourself. You've read the headlines. Then, hard not to, a company valued in the billions, disrupting an industry everyone thought was locked down. And the mystery around its founder? He studied her, his expression tight. I suppose the mystery is over. Claire took a sip of sparkling water, letting the silence stretch. I didn't realize I owed anyone an explanation. Jonathan shifted, the mask of ease faltering for just a moment. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. 5 years? Claire? And nothing. Not a word. Her eyes met his steadily. I tried words once. They weren't enough. The line cut sharper than she intended, and for a moment he looked as though she had struck him. Around them, the reception continued, executives laughing, glasses clinking, cameras flashing, but within their circle, the air was taut, fragile. Jonathan cleared his throat, forcing composure. You've changed. Claire tilted her head slightly. Or perhaps I've only become who I was always meant to be. He studied her face, searching for the woman he had known, but she wasn't there. The secretary he had dismissed was gone, replaced by someone he could no longer easily define. Are you here for business? He asked, though the question was almost absurd. Claire's smile returned, faint and deliberate. Always. Their exchange was interrupted by a journalist approaching with a microphone. Ms. Montgomery, may we have a comment about Aurora's upcoming announcement? Not tonight, Claire replied smoothly. Tomorrow. The reporter nodded and drifted away. Jonathan remained, his jaw tight, his glass untouched. Finally, he spoke again, quieter this time. What is it you want? Claire. Her gaze didn't waver. The same thing I wanted 5 years ago. A seat at the table. Jonathan's eyes flickered, a mixture of recognition and unease. He opened his mouth as though to reply, then closed it again. Claire set her glass down and adjusted the strap of her clutch. Enjoy the evening, Mr. Reed. I'll see you tomorrow. She turned and walked away, her steps measured, her spine straight. She didn't look back, though she felt his gaze burning into her as she left the ballroom. In the quiet of her hotel suite that night, Claire sat by the window overlooking Chicago's skyline. The boys were asleep in adjoining rooms, their laughter earlier in the evening still echoing faintly in her ears. She let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since seeing him. It hadn't undone her. It hadn't shattered her. She had faced Jonathan Reed, and she had walked away on her own terms. But tomorrow, she knew, would be different. Tomorrow wasn't about chance encounters. Tomorrow would be battle. The main auditorium of the Chicago Technology Summit was filled to capacity. More than 2,000 people had gathered, executives, investors, journalists, and young innovators hoping to witness the future of the industry. Cameras lined the back wall, lights blazing, ready to broadcast the keynotes to millions around the world. Backstage, Claire adjusted the cuffs of her crimson blazer. She could hear the murmur of the crowd beyond the curtain, rising and falling like a tide. Ellen stood at her side, a steadying presence. You're ready, Ellen said quietly. Claire exhaled slowly. I've been ready for years. The announcer's voice boomed through the hall. Please welcome to the stage the founder and CEO of Aurora Systems, Claire Montgomery. Applause erupted, a wave that washed over her as she stepped into the lights. For a moment, the brightness blinded her, but then she saw them faces turn toward her, expectant, curious. Some eyes widened in recognition, others in surprise. The mystery CEO was no longer a shadow. She walked to the podium with measured grace. Each click of her heels against the stage floor echoed like a drumbeat in her chest. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady, resonant. 5 years ago, I was not standing on this stage. 5 years ago, I was a single mother of 3, working 2 jobs, wondering if the lights would stay on another month. I knew what it meant to be overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like a stone. But I also knew something else. I knew that efficiency is not a luxury. It's survival. Businesses small, mid-sized, even the ones barely hanging on deserve the same tools as the giants. That belief became Aurora Systems. She clicked to her first slide charts, statistics, testimonials. But her words carried more power than any graph. Today, Aurora software is used by over 200 companies across the nation. We've reduced waste, cut fuel consumption, and saved millions of dollars. But this isn't just about numbers. It's about leveling the playing field. It's about telling the small business owner that they matter. The applause came in waves, but she raised her hand gently for quiet. This company began at a kitchen table, after my children had gone to sleep. It was built with pennies scraped together, with second-hand furniture, with hope and desperation. And it grew because people believed in it, because people believed in me. And now, Aurora Systems is here to stay. The audience rose to its feet, applause thunderous, reporters already firing questions into their recorders. Claire stood tall, her heart pounding, but her face serene. She had done it. She had claimed her voice. In the front rows, Jonathan Reed sat frozen. He had not expected this. He had known Aurora Systems was making waves, but to see Claire, his former secretary, standing at the podium, commanding the stage with authority and grace, was something his mind struggled to process. He leaned back, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Around him, executives whispered, some glancing at him with thinly veiled curiosity. He could feel the heat rising in his neck, the humiliation of recognition. After the keynote, Claire was swarmed by journalists, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. "Ms. Montgomery, how did you build Aurora from nothing? Can you comment on your connection to Reed Enterprises? What's next for Aurora Systems?" She answered selectively. Always calm, always composed, her words were measured, inspiring but firm, giving just enough without revealing the storm building beneath the surface. Backstage, Ellen handed her a bottle of water. "You lit the place on fire," she said, pride gleaming in her eyes. Claire allowed herself a small smile. "Good. It's time." Meanwhile, across town, Jonathan sat in his office at Reed Enterprises, his phone buzzing non-stop. Alerts poured in, news outlets reporting Claire's revelation, analysts speculating about Aurora's next moves. And then came the real blow, a message from his legal team. Aurora Systems has acquired 48% of Reed Enterprises' outstanding shares. Jonathan's face drained of color. "No," he whispered, scanning the documents attached. "This can't be right." Another notification buzzed. Aurora had quietly been buying shares through shell companies, building a position so strong it was nearly impossible to counter. His phone rang one of his board members. "Jonathan, what the hell is going on? Did you know about this? She's coming for us." Jonathan's hands shook as he tried to form a response. I'll handle it." But even as he said the words, he knew how hollow they sounded. That evening, while Claire dined quietly with her sons in the presidential suite of their hotel, Jonathan's desperation reached a fever pitch. His name appeared on her phone screen once, twice, 3 times. Finally, a message lit up. "We need to talk. Tonight. Please." Claire set the phone down without answering. Ethan was telling a story about the museum's dinosaur exhibit. Daniel was proudly reciting facts he had memorized, and Samuel was sketching the skeleton in his notebook. She listened, laughed, and asked questions, as though the outside world didn't exist. Only later, when the boys were asleep. Did she glance again at the phone? More messages waited. This isn't just business. We can resolve this. Call me. Claire, please. You don't know what you're doing. You can't destroy me like this. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. She typed a single reply. This isn't destruction, Jonathan. This is justice. The morning was bright, almost cruelly so, as Claire dressed her sons in matching navy suits. Ethan tugged at his tie, muttering about how uncomfortable it was. Daniel insisted on folding his pocket square with geometric precision. Samuel said little, only slipping his small hand into his mother's as they prepared to leave the hotel suite. Claire wore a crimson suit deliberately chosen, the bold color cut against the sea of gray she knew would await at Reed Enterprises. She checked her reflection one last time in the mirror. No longer the trembling secretary who had been escorted out 5 years ago. Now she was a CEO returning not as a guest, but as the majority shareholder. The motorcade pulled up to the tower. Its steel and glass facade loomed against the Chicago sky. Familiar, yet changed. Claire felt her son's eyes widen as they craned their necks upward. "This is his building," Samuel whispered, his voice solemn. Claire's chest tightened, but her tone remained steady. "It's our building now." The lobby fell into hushed silence as she entered. Employees recognized her instantly from the morning's headlines. Some whispered, others simply stared at the 3 boys trailing behind her, their resemblance to Jonathan unmistakable. The receptionist at the front desk stammered, "Ms. Montgomery, the board is expecting you. Conference room on the 30th floor." Claire nodded, her heels clicking against the marble as they moved toward the elevator. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Are you nervous?" "Mom," she smiled faintly. "No, I've been waiting for this day." But inside, her heart hammered. The boardroom was vast, lined with polished wood and dominated by a long mahogany table. At its head sat Jonathan Reed, his expression a fragile mask of control. Around him, 12 board members murmured among themselves, folders open, documents spread across the table. The doors opened. Claire entered, her sons walking in perfect step behind her. The sound of her heels against the hardwood echoed in the silence. Every eye turned, every whisper ceased. Jonathan's face drained of color. "What is this?" he whispered, rising slightly from his chair. Claire placed her leather folder on the table. "This, Mr. Reed, is business. My children accompany me today as a matter of schedule." The boys took their seats in the corner, tablets in hand. But they didn't stay quiet for long. As the meeting began, Claire laid out Aurora's position, 51% ownership of Reed Enterprises acquired through open market purchases. She spoke clearly, methodically, her lawyers distributing documents to each board member. Jonathan interrupted, his voice strained. "You can't do this. This company is mine." Claire didn't flinch. "It was yours. Now it belongs to the shareholders, and I am the majority." The chairman, an older man with silver hair, cleared his throat as he skimmed the papers. His eyes widened. "It's all legal," he said quietly. The room erupted in whispers. Jonathan's fists clenched, his knuckles white. And then, the moment came. Ethan, restless, leaned toward Samuel and whispered too loudly, "That man looks like the picture of Dad Mom keeps in her office." The room froze. Daniel looked up from his tablet. "That's him, isn't it? Mom? He's our dad." Samuel, solemn as ever, turned his gaze directly on Jonathan. "Are you our father?" The words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Jonathan's chair scraped back as he staggered to his feet. His eyes darted between the boys, their identical blue eyes staring back at him, mirrors of his own. This is some kind of trick," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Claire's expression remained serene, though her heart clenched at her son's innocence. "No trick. Jonathan, meet Ethan, Daniel, and Samuel, your sons." Gasps echoed around the table. One board member dropped his pen. Another muttered, "My God." The chairman sat back heavily in his chair. "Well," he said slowly, That explains quite a bit. Jonathan swayed slightly, his hand gripping the back of his chair. His face was pale, his lips trembling. All these years, you kept them from me. Claire's voice was calm, but steel-edged every word. No, I tried to tell you. You sent me away with a check. The boys, sensing the tension but not understanding its depth, moved closer to their mother. Ethan, bold as always, crossed his arms. So, are you going to say something? Dad. Jonathan's breath hitched. He looked at the three of them, their matching suits, their curious eyes, the living proof of choices he had made and could never undo. His voice broke. I don't know what to say. Samuel tilted his head, his voice soft but piercing. You could start with hello. The boardroom erupted in uneasy murmurs, but Jonathan sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man undone. Claire turned back to the table, her composure unshaken. Gentlemen, ladies, the matter before us is leadership. Reed Enterprises requires stability, effective immediately. I am restructuring the board and assuming control as chairwoman. Mr. Reed may retain a ceremonial position if the board so desires, but executive control transfers to Aurora. The chairman nodded slowly. I see no grounds to object. All in favor, hands rose around the table. The decision was swift, inevitable. Jonathan didn't raise his. He sat slumped, staring at the children across the room. When the vote concluded, Claire gathered her documents, signaling the meeting's end. She turned to her sons. Boys, let's go. But before they reached the door, Daniel paused, looking back at Jonathan. Will you come home with us now that we've found you? The simplicity of the question sliced through the air sharper than any accusation. Board members shifted uncomfortably, waiting for his answer. Jonathan's lips parted, but no sound came. Finally, he managed a hoarse whisper. I don't think I can. Not yet. The boys exchanged glances, confusion clouding their young faces. Claire rested a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Come on, we have work to do. They left the boardroom together, their steps steady, their heads held high, behind them. Jonathan Reed sat in silence, surrounded by the empire he had thought untouchable, now owned by the woman he had once cast aside, and the children he had tried to erase. The boardroom still hummed with the shock of what had just unfolded. Jonathan sat hunched in his chair, pale and shaken, while the three boys pressed close to their mother, their youthful questions hanging in the air like smoke. Claire remained standing. Her folder lay open on the polished table, filled with documents that carried the weight of truth. She tapped it once, drawing the board members' attention back from the spectacle of Jonathan's collapse. Gentlemen, ladies, she said, her voice calm but commanding. Let us return to the matter at hand. Her lead attorney slid fresh packets of papers across the table. These documents confirm Aurora Systems' ownership of 51% of Reed Enterprises, acquired through legitimate market transactions, executed over the last 18 months. All filings are compliant with SEC regulations. The board members leafed through the evidence, murmuring. The numbers were undeniable. Claire's red suit glowed under the overhead lights as she continued. Alongside these, she added, her tone sharpening, are records from 5 years ago, emails, letters, even signed delivery receipts, proof that I informed Mr. Reed of my pregnancy, proof that he ignored those communications, and instead attempted to resolve the matter with a check. She pulled out a single slip of paper, framed in protective plastic, the $50,000 check Jonathan had once handed her. She laid it gently on the table. A collective intake of breath filled the room. The check was no longer just money. It was evidence, a symbol of arrogance and erasure. One board member whispered, "Unbelievable." Another muttered, "He buried this." Jonathan finally stirred, his voice hoarse. "This is character assassination. It has nothing to do with—" "On the contrary," Claire interrupted, her tone cool. "It has everything to do with leadership. Integrity matters, accountability matters, and today, those values return to this company. The chairman cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he examined the papers. The facts are clear. Majority control rests with Aurora Systems, represented here by Miss Montgomery. Mr. Reed's past actions, while personal, raise significant concerns about his judgment. The board must act. Jonathan slammed his palm on the table. You can't do this to me. This is my company, my father's legacy. Claire met his outburst with unshaken eyes. Legacies aren't inherited, Jonathan. They're built. You were handed an empire and let it crumble. I built mine from nothing. Silence followed. Heavy, unrelenting silence. The chairman called for a vote. All those in favor of removing Jonathan Reed as CEO. Effective immediately. Please raise your hand. One by one, hands lifted around the table. Even those who had long been loyal to Jonathan hesitated only briefly before siding with the inevitable. The weight of evidence was too great, the tide too strong. Jonathan's eyes darted wildly from face to face. You cowards! After everything I've done, enough. The chairman's voice was firm. The motion passes, effective immediately. Jonathan Reed is removed as Chief Executive Officer of Reed Enterprises. His seat on the board will remain non-executive. Pending further review, he turned toward Claire. Ms. Montgomery, as majority shareholder, the board recognizes your authority to appoint interim leadership. Do you accept the position? Claire placed her hand on the folder before her. I do. The words reverberated in the room like a gavel strike. Claire Montgomery, once dismissed as a secretary, now sat at the helm of Reed Enterprises. But inside, she felt no surge of triumph, no gloating satisfaction. What filled her instead was something quieter, deeper relief. For 5 years, she had carried the weight of injustice, the sting of betrayal, the humiliation of being cast aside. Now, standing in the very room where her dignity had been stripped, she felt that burden lift, not because she had won, but because justice had been served. She glanced at her sons, seated quietly with Ellen at the far end of the room. Ethan's restless energy was subdued, Daniel's eyes wide with curiosity, Samuel's expression unreadable. They didn't fully understand the mechanics of shareholder votes or corporate takeovers, but they knew their mother had stood her ground, and they knew she had prevailed. Jonathan sank into his chair, his face ashen. For the first time in his life, power had slipped through his fingers, and nothing he said could pull it back. Claire studied him for a moment, not with cruelty, but with clarity. I didn't come here for revenge. Jonathan, I came here for accountability. You told me once that I would never belong in this world. Today, I claim my place not for me alone, but for my children, and for every person you ever treated as disposable. He looked up at her, his lips parting as though to argue, but no words came. He lowered his gaze instead. Defeated. The meeting adjourned soon after. Board members filed out, whispering among themselves about the unprecedented shift of power they had just witnessed. The news would hit the markets within the hour, reshaping the future of the company and the industry alike. Claire gathered her papers slowly, her movements deliberate. She slipped the plastic-protected check back into her folder, a relic, but also a reminder. As she turned to leave, the chairman approached her. Ms. Montgomery, I must say, I've sat in this room for 3 decades. I've never seen a coup executed with such precision. Claire inclined her head. This wasn't a coup, it was the truth. Finally recognized, outside the boardroom, her sons rushed to her side. Ethan grinned. Mom, you won. She knelt down, smoothing a hand over his hair. No, sweetheart, we didn't win. We made things right. Daniel frowned thoughtfully. So, does that mean this company is ours now? In a way, Claire said gently. But more than that, it means people will finally listen when they should have listened long ago. Samuel slipped his hand into hers again. You look lighter, he whispered. Claire smiled softly. Because I am. The boardroom had emptied, leaving only the echo of hurried footsteps and whispered conversations. Claire lingered a moment, her hand resting on the back of a leather chair. The weight of the morning pressed against her shoulders, but her expression remained composed. A soft knock broke the silence. Jonathan stepped back into the room, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his face drawn and pale. He looked smaller now, stripped of the authority that had once cloaked him like armor. "Claire," he said quietly, "please." A moment. She considered sending him away. Every instinct told her to protect the peace she had just claimed, but something in his voice, ragged, almost desperate, made her pause. She nodded once, curtly. Jonathan closed the door behind him. For a moment, he simply stood there, staring at the polished table where his world had unraveled. Then he turned to her. "I've lost everything today," he said, his voice unsteady. "But the thing I regret most isn't the company. It's them. The boys." Claire's jaw tightened. "You don't get to call them yours now. Jonathan, you had that chance. You threw it away." He stepped closer, his hands trembling slightly. "I was young, arrogant. I thought God. I thought I could buy my way out of responsibility. My father's voice was in my head, telling me to protect the company at all costs. I didn't see them. I didn't see you. You saw me," Claire cut in, her voice cold. "You saw a woman carrying your children and chose humiliation over honesty. That wasn't blindness. That was cruelty." Jonathan flinched, but pressed on. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But Claire, please, let me try now. Let me know them, just a little. I can't undo the past, but I can do better in the future." Her heart twisted at his words. She remembered nights alone with colicky infants, the weight of unpaid bills, the ache of abandonment. Could he even fathom those years? "They don't need you," she said firmly. "They have me. They have stability, love, a home." Jonathan's eyes brimmed with something raw fear, maybe, or desperation, but they deserve a father. "And whether you want it or not, that's what I am. You can't erase me from their blood. Claire, please, let me earn a place in their lives." The plea lingered in the air. Claire's resolve wavered, just for a moment. She thought of Ethan's restless questions, Daniel's meticulous curiosity, Samuel's quiet yearning. They had asked about him more than once, their innocent voices carrying questions she could never fully answer. Why doesn't he want us? Will we ever meet him? Part of her longed to shield them forever, to keep them safe from disappointment. But another part whispered that maybe they deserved to see for themselves, to decide in time whether he belonged. Her silence stretched. Jonathan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'll do anything. Therapy, supervised visits, whatever conditions you want. Just don't shut me out completely." Claire met his gaze, searching. She saw regret there. Yes, but also weakness. She saw a man grappling with the collapse of his power, desperate for something to hold on to. Was it truly fatherhood he wanted, or redemption for himself? Finally, she spoke, her voice measured. "If I allow you near them, it will not be for your sake. It will be for theirs. They are extraordinary boys. Jonathan, brilliant, kind, resilient, and they became that without you." He swallowed hard. "I'd like to believe I can still add something to their lives." "Then you'll prove it," Claire said firmly. "Not with words, not with promises, with actions. You will see them only under supervision. At times I approve, until I know you're worthy of more." Jonathan nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Yes. Anything." She stepped past him toward the door. "Don't mistake this for forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't mine to give. It belongs to them. If they choose it one day." Her hand rested on the handle. She glanced back once, her eyes steady. "And Jonathan, if you hurt them, even once, there will be no second chance." His shoulders slumped. "I understand." Claire left him there in the empty boardroom, the man who had once dismissed her now pleading for scraps of fatherhood. As she walked down the hall, her heart pounded with conflicting currents, anger, sorrow, and a fragile thread of reluctant hope. She had given him a door, barely cracked open. Whether he stepped through it with integrity or stumbled back into failure was no longer her burden. Her burden was, and always would be, her sons. Within weeks of the boardroom coup, the transformation of Reed Enterprises began. Claire refused to erase history entirely. Legacies mattered, even when they were tangled in pain. But she also knew that the company needed a new identity, a name that honored both the past and the future. At the official press conference, she stood behind a podium flanked by banners bearing the new logo, Aurora Reed Group. This company has stood for generations. She told the audience of journalists and employees, but legacy must evolve. Aurora represents innovation, resilience, and a commitment to leveling the playing field. Reed represents history, foundation, and lessons learned. Together, Aurora Reed Group will lead with vision, integrity, and humanity. The announcement rippled through the markets. Analysts debated whether the new hybrid identity was a brilliant compromise or a risky gamble. But employees, many of whom had quietly feared for their jobs under Jonathan's erratic leadership, felt hope for the first time in years. Claire's changes came quickly. The executive floor was reorganized, not just with new names on the doors, but with a new philosophy. She created a family innovation center on an entire floor of the headquarters, an after-school program and creative lab where employees' children could learn coding, art, and science under the supervision of qualified teachers. It wasn't just for her own sons, though Ethan, Daniel, and Samuel quickly became the center's first ambassadors. Ethan gravitated toward robotics, always eager to lead a team challenge. Daniel dove into math puzzles and 3D modeling software. Samuel filled sketchbooks with designs that blended art and engineering, surprising even the mentors. To the employees, seeing the CEO's own children in the same shared space as theirs sent a powerful message: no one here was above or beneath anyone else. But Claire's reforms didn't stop with family-friendly policies. She reviewed wage structures, cutting unnecessary executive perks and redirecting funds toward fair pay, and expanded healthcare. She instituted anonymous feedback systems so employees could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. She established scholarships for women in technology, particularly single mothers, remembering her own struggle to be taken seriously. At one town hall meeting, an older receptionist stood and asked, voice trembling, "Does this mean we'll finally be treated with respect? Not like we're disposable?" Claire's gaze softened. No one in this company is disposable. Not anymore. The room erupted in applause. At home, her sons were adapting to their new reality. With the move to Chicago came new schools, new friends, and a new rhythm of life. Ethan thrived on the soccer team, quickly voted captain by his peers. He came home flushed with excitement, talking about teamwork and strategy, his natural leadership shining. Daniel excelled academically, his teachers marveling at his precision and drive. But Claire gently reminded him to be kind to himself, to accept mistakes as part of growth. Samuel, quiet and thoughtful, surprised everyone when he submitted a design for a school art fair, a mural concept showing the Chicago skyline transforming into a rising phoenix. The judges awarded him first place, and the mural was soon painted on the wall of the Family Innovation Center. When Claire saw it for the first time, she fought back tears. "You've captured everything we've been through," she told him, pulling him close. Samuel only shrugged, but his eyes glowed with quiet pride. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Claire sat in her office overlooking the city. Ellen brought in 2 cups of coffee and dropped into the chair across from her. "You've changed the place already," Ellen said, gesturing toward the bustling headquarters below. "People are smiling again. I don't think I've ever seen that in this building." Claire leaned back, exhaustion lining her features, but satisfaction softening her eyes. "I just want to build the company I needed back then, the one that didn't exist when I was alone and scared." Ellen nodded slowly. "You're doing it, and you're making enemies too. You know, not everyone likes a humane CEO." Claire gave a small smile. "Then they'll learn, or they'll leave." The media began calling her the conscience of corporate America. She deflected such titles, but deep down, she recognized the truth. Her leadership was more than business. It was a statement, a rebuttal to the system that had once discarded her. Still, she remained careful. She knew Jonathan was watching from the sidelines, chafing at his reduced role. She hadn't decided yet how much space to grant him in the boys' lives. But she knew this much: his influence over the company was finished. The Aurora Reed Group was hers now, hers to protect, hers to grow, hers to shape into something that could stand as both a business empire and a beacon of change. As she left the office late one night, her sons waiting in the car with Ellen, Claire paused at the entrance to the lobby. The new logo gleamed above the doors. For a moment, she let herself breathe it in. This was not revenge. This was reclamation. This was what justice looked like, not the destruction of an old empire, but the rebuilding of it into something new, something worthy of the future, she whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. Never again will anyone here be made to feel less than. Then she stepped into the night, where her son's laughter spilled from the car windows, grounding her in what truly mattered. The first supervised visit was held in a quiet room at the Family Innovation Center. Claire insisted it take place there, not in a park or a cafe where strangers might gawk. The space was neutral warm, filled with books and puzzles, a place that felt safe for children. Jonathan arrived early. He looked different from the man who once strode into boardrooms with unchecked arrogance. His suit was replaced with a simple sweater and jeans, his hair less styled, his eyes shadowed with something that resembled humility. He sat nervously on the edge of a couch, waiting. When the boys entered, their reactions varied. Ethan froze for a moment, then crossed his arms, studying Jonathan like a challenge. Daniel glanced from Jonathan to Claire, unsure of the rules. Samuel hung back, quiet as always, his eyes watchful. Jonathan rose slowly. "Hi," he said, his voice unsteady. I'm your father." The words landed heavily. Ethan frowned. Why weren't you here before Jonathan's throat tightened? He crouched to Ethan's level. "Because I was foolish. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't. And I'm sorry." The boys didn't answer right away. They moved toward the shelves, pulling down puzzles and blocks. Jonathan followed, cautious, letting them set the pace. The first few minutes were awkward. Jonathan's attempts at conversation fell flat. Ethan avoided eye contact. Daniel asked practical questions. "Do you like soccer? Do you know multiplication?" as though testing his credibility. But Samuel lingered near Jonathan's chair, silent. He picked up a sketch pad and began to draw. Jonathan leaned over. "What are you working on?" Samuel tilted the pad, revealing a rough sketch of a tree with 3 branches. Jonathan swallowed hard. "That's beautiful. May I sit with you?" The boy gave the faintest nod, and for the rest of the hour, Samuel let Jonathan watch him draw, occasionally sliding the pad closer for him to see. It wasn't much, but it was something, a thread of connection quietly forming. Claire watched from the observation window. Her arms were crossed, but her expression was softer than she expected. Part of her wanted to storm in, to shield the boys from disappointment, to remind Jonathan that connection couldn't be built in an hour. But another part of her saw the sincerity in his hunched posture, the way he didn't push, didn't demand, just waited for them to meet him halfway. Her thoughts tangled. Can a man change this much, or is he simply desperate to salvage what he's lost? The social worker beside her made a note and whispered, "They're curious. That's good. Curiosity is the beginning of relationship." Claire nodded faintly, though her jaw remained tight. Over the following weeks, the visits continued. Each time, Jonathan arrived with less nervousness, carrying small gestures of thoughtfulness, a set of soccer cards for Ethan, a math puzzle book for Daniel, a new set of sketching pencils for Samuel. Ethan resisted the hardest, often testing him with sharp questions. "Why should we believe you care now? Are you going to leave again?" Jonathan never dodged. He answered with quiet honesty. "I can't change the past, but I can show you who I want to be now." Daniel warmed faster. He liked Jonathan's explanations of how machines worked, how algorithms could solve traffic problems. For a boy who loved order, it felt like a bridge. But it was Samuel who formed the deepest bond. The boy's quiet nature mirrored Jonathan's own unspoken loneliness. They sat together for long stretches, sketching side by side, sometimes without speaking. One afternoon, Samuel surprised everyone by slipping his small hand into Jonathan's. From the observation window, Claire felt her throat tighten. One evening, after the boys were tucked into bed, Ellen found Claire sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at her tea. "You saw it today, didn't you?" Ellen asked gently. Claire nodded slowly. Samuel reached for him. "I wasn't ready for that." Ellen sat across from her. "Children don't carry grudges the way adults do. They see what's in front of them. Maybe that's what makes them braver." Claire let out a long breath. "Braver or more vulnerable? I don't know if Jonathan deserves that trust yet. But you gave him the chance," Ellen reminded her. "And that says something about you." Claire looked away, her voice low. "It's not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe. It's a seed." 6 months passed, and the skyscraper that once carried only the Reed name now gleamed with a new identity. Aurora Reed Group. Its logo shone across the Chicago skyline, a phoenix rising from silver lines that curved into the shape of a bridge. It was more than branding, it was a promise. Under Claire's leadership, the company flourished beyond what analysts had predicted. Contracts poured in from logistics firms, retailers, and even international governments seeking efficiency solutions. Aurora Reed's software and hardware integration reshaped global supply chains, saving billions in waste and lowering environmental impact. The press called it a revolution, led by the woman no one saw coming. Claire laughed when she read that line, though not unkindly. "They see me now," she thought. Her days remained long, a balance of board meetings, innovation reviews, and time with her boys. But the heaviness that had once dogged her steps was gone. In its place was clarity. Employees flourished under the humane policies she had introduced. Wages rose, healthcare expanded, and the Family Innovation Center buzzed with children's laughter each afternoon. Productivity didn't fall. As skeptics had warned, it soared. Loyalty had a way of fueling excellence. One afternoon, Claire stopped by the center after a board call. She found Ethan on the soccer field leading a small group in drills, his voice carrying across the space. Daniel sat in a corner, tutoring a younger child in fractions with meticulous patience. Samuel was sketching quietly in his notebook, lost in a world of lines and color. Her heart swelled. They're growing, each in their own way, strong, whole, unafraid. The outside world noticed too. In October, Fortune magazine requested an exclusive feature. The photo shoot took place in the rooftop garden of Aurora Reed's headquarters. Claire wore a navy suit with understated jewelry, her hair loose in the breeze. Her son stood beside her, Ethan, with a confident grin, Daniel holding a book, Samuel clutching his sketch pad. The cover headline read, "The Phoenix Who Rewrote the Rules, Claire Montgomery and the New Age of Leadership." Inside, the article traced her journey from a discarded secretary to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire. It didn't shy away from the scandal, nor from the fact that Jonathan Reed had once tried to erase her. But the heart of the story was resilience, how Claire had transformed betrayal into strength, and how her vision had reshaped an industry. When asked about revenge, Claire's response was clear. "I didn't build Aurora Reed as payback. I built it as proof to myself, to my sons, and to anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, that our worth is not for others to decide. It is forged in our resilience, in our willingness to keep standing when the world tells us to sit down." Jonathan remained a shadow on the edge of their story. He attended his supervised visits faithfully, showing up each time with quiet humility. The boys' reactions varied, Ethan still cautious, Daniel curious, Samuel quietly loyal. Claire never interfered, though she always observed. Forgiveness was not hers to grant. That choice belonged to her sons, and she knew, in time, they would find their own answers. On a winter evening, as snow dusted the city. Claire lingered in her office after hours. Ellen joined her, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa instead of coffee. "You realize you've done something no one thought possible," Ellen said, handing her a mug. "You turned a scandal into an empire." Claire smiled faintly. "It was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could be more than what they tried to make me. And you did." Ellen raised her mug to the next chapter. Claire lifted hers in return to the future. The future came into focus every time she watched her sons. On Saturdays, they often played in the rooftop garden, a sprawling green space she had ordered to be built when renovations began. It wasn't just for them, it was for every child whose parent worked at Aurora Reed. A place where play could coexist with ambition, where growth wasn't sacrificed to success. That Saturday afternoon, she stood by the glass doors, watching. Ethan darted across the lawn, chasing a soccer ball. Daniel shouted rules to make the game fair, his natural precision turning play into structure. Samuel trailed behind, sketchpad in hand, pausing to draw the skyline as the sun dipped low. Their laughter filled the air. It was music, pure and unguarded. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, letting it sink in. She remembered the nights of hunger, the coins counted for groceries, the humiliation of being escorted out of a building while pregnant and alone. She remembered the doubt, the fear, the endless exhaustion, and now this. 3 boys alive with possibility, a company alive with purpose, a life no longer defined by what was taken from her, but by what she had built with her own hands. She stepped outside, the cold air biting her cheeks. The boys ran to her instantly, their arms wrapping around her legs. "Come play," Mama Ethan shouted, tugging her hand. "I'm referee," Daniel announced, already scribbling rules onto a scrap of paper. Samuel slipped his sketchpad into her hand. On the page, he had drawn a tree its roots deep, its branches wide, and 3 birds perched side by side. Claire's throat tightened. She kissed his forehead. "It's perfect," she whispered. And in that moment, she knew their story wasn't about revenge or even triumph. It was about legacy, not the kind carved into stone buildings or stock reports, but the kind written in laughter, in growth, in the quiet resilience of a family that refused to break. As the sun sank behind the skyline, Claire lifted her eyes to the glowing logo on the tower Aurora Reed Group, a name born of fire, of failure, of faith. A legacy not of what was lost, but of what had been courageously, defiantly, lovingly built, at its heart. Claire's story is not about revenge, it is about resilience. It reminds us that no matter how deeply we are wronged, our worth is never defined by someone else's rejection. Too often in life, we allow the judgments of others to become the mirrors in which we see ourselves. But Claire's journey teaches us that true strength comes from within, born of persistence, faith, and the courage to keep going when everything feels lost. She turned humiliation into fuel, despair into determination, and single motherhood into a legacy of strength for her children. The empire she built was not merely financial. It was proof that compassion and integrity can guide leadership just as powerfully as ambition. For those of us who have lived long enough to know disappointment, this story is a reminder: the seasons of struggle are not the end. They are the soil in which something new can grow. So, when life tells you you are not enough, remember Claire's quiet defiance. Remember that your story is still being written. And remember, the most lasting legacy is not what we conquer, but what we create with love, dignity, and unshakable faith in ourselves. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. If Claire's story touched your heart, reminded you of your own strength, or gave you hope for what's possible, please let us know. Your support means the world to us. By liking, sharing, and subscribing, you help bring more powerful stories like this to life and share them with others who may need a spark of inspiration today. So, don't stop here. Click subscribe, share this video with a friend, and stay with us for the next story that just might change the way you see the world. From our hearts to yours, thank you.